there was much appreciative discussion happening at our lunch break in Ireland here, Christina, for you and all your speakers. Everybody is really enjoying it, and can think of
It's
lots
good
of
to hear.
amazing applications for it. If only we could have the time to do it. Yeah.
It's good to hear, because whenever I'm preparing presentations, I'm always on the verge of like, is it gonna be super boring to everyone else but me? Is it just me who is like going on the nitty-gritty matching of letters with collectors, digging through archives and reading excerpts of like published books from like 1780s or something?
Yeah. It's so satisfying, that kind of work, though. When you match
It,
something up, you're like, yes.
it's only satisfying when you actually find what you're looking for. If
Yeah.
you don't, then I'm like, I just wasted 2 hours of my life and I got nothing. So that's, I think when I used to georeference from Malcolm, that was my general question, like how long I should spend on a label. And at the
Yeah.
time when on the project that I was working for him, he was like, yeah, spend as much time as you want. But when you're doing, it was a different project. But when I'm doing like, when you're doing like mass digitization, and you know there's gonna be like at least 80 million objects that you have to go through,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it's time has a different meaning. And if you're doing georeferencing and transcription a lot, after a couple of minutes, or like 10 minutes doing that, like searching, you're gonna know that you're going nowhere and just round in
Yeah.
circles. And that's when I'm usually just like, let's move on, let's come back in another time. And the first time I was
avoid the temptation of falling into the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Oh, I fall in plenty of rabbit holes if I feel like it's going somewhere. But sometimes if I just get circled back to the same resource, then I'm like, that's at the moment end of it. The good part of like putting the data aside and just coming back to it later time, that it's not only us doing the georeference digitization, but every library all around the world. And I first started doing georeferencing in 2018. And sometimes I go back to records that I georeferenced back then, especially if I'm not satisfied with the results that I got, and I can see like even if like 6 years time, there is so much more resources and publications available that I couldn't find back then when I was doing in 2018. So there is logic, especially at the moment, putting things aside that you don't have research for, like resource for, because it could be that someone in a very obscure library just gonna digitize a book that no one ever seen in the last 100 years, and that's gonna be like the key for 100 of your labels.
Definitely.
Especially if it's one of those situations when your collector was having everything in a notebook, not on the labels, and then they died, and their spouse or family just auctioned off whatever, and then different people bought the different items. And it's really difficult to do anything. That's why we have fantastic projects like the Wally catalog, which is just making it like the catalog available to everyone. And it's Wally's collection is not just in one institute, it's scattered.
Yeah.
But there is only one catalog. So without a catalog, that one institute would be, hey, lucky we have it. And the rest of the institute is like,
no idea. Yeah.
and Wally's labels
that's
are one
fascinating.
of those
I mean, we seem
situations.
to have a lot of people. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's just Wally's labels are particularly those situations when instead of detailed information, it just has Wally catalog number 28. Then good luck.
Yeah. I mean, we seem to have a lot of people back in the meeting, so we can probably crack on. Do you have anything to share at this time, Christina, or is it just kind of a discussion, or what do you think?
I prepared slides, but if there is any question that we haven't answered from the morning, maybe that would be a good time, or we can just go in. The slides that I prepared for the afternoon are not really slides. Similarly, in the morning, I had a couple of case studies, and I thought we can just go through them together, and discussing the specific situations around them. And I thought if someone has a particular label that we can look at and we can discuss it, like where to start or something. Or I have plenty of horrible labels to show, so
Brilliant.
It is
Sounds
it
good.
is it is really up to whichever. So I can share the slides if I remember how. And okay, I think it was this one and the other military. Oh no. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm not very Zoom literate. I think it shows. Oh, I can
And
take
we
this too.
can see your PowerPoint anyway, or PowerPoint window, but
Okay. So yeah,
yeah.
yeah. If I'm doing this, I don't see the chat, so I'm going to rely on people helping me with the chat. So yeah, so the slide I prepared, there is this particular one, which in a moment time, you will find the reference to one of like my morning slides. So that particular label is from Handy Fetcher Hans. I think I mentioned him earlier. I absolutely in love with all of his labels, even though he is using a horrible transliteration system for Chinese to write his locations. And also, like, other than the names, every label is in Latin, but it's one of those handwritings that is really pretty to look at. I'm not an expert in Hans, so I don't know if it was his handwriting or he had an assistant. But it's very pretty, and I particularly like them. So he was a vice consul in China in the 19th century, a British vice consul. I think he was stationed in Guangzhou, which is like sort of southern-ish China. And he collected a lot there, either on his own or with other people while he was a vice consul there. And some places are more findable than others. His label is the particular ones where you can see like it's from 1857. We have labels from 1860s as well. So it's quite a long time ago in China. And there is a lot of instances when you have to know background knowledge, like how people traveled with, because it can go very wrong if you don't have this background knowledge. So if when we look at like details like it says, I don't know, 5 kilometers from a certain place, then when we are doing georeferencing for the sake of standardization, we assume that it's like air distance. But that old Chinese labels are the one where this is what takes you to the wrong direction immediately. Especially in areas of China that are very mountainous areas. People wouldn't travel on foot on mountains, hills, because the mountainous region is full of little rivers that are connected to each other. So one of the very common way of traveling at the time was on boats, and the boat would just go through the rivers and doing stops at cities and general stops, and people would get on the boat and then continue their journey. And or like stopping at cities if you had like a long journey. There were different tickets to buy if you were spending the night on board, how many nights you are spending on the boat. And other than this, we have a very detailed account of how these travels happened, because one botanist who was working for the East India Company actually dressed up as a Chinese person, pretended to be Chinese, and undertook a boat trip like this. And we have his detailed account of the entire journey, which was highly illegal. Foreigners were not allowed to entering deeper regions to China, only like at the port cities. He is one of the person who was credited to steal the China from China, which is not exactly what happened, but I think the original stories would be less catchy for the public. But he was certainly a character, and he certainly entered the country illegally. But he was also a botanist, and his description of how the Chinese landscape and the cities look like is giving us a window that is really rare to see, especially that much of a distance. So I really enjoy his books. So this particular label, I really sidetracked. So it's from Hans, who was living a lot later than Robert Fortune, who is the botanist of the East India Company I mentioned. And in this particular label, he's mentioning a pagoda in Amoy, which is Xiamen, called the Lam Tai Wu. And then I started going down the rabbit hole, like, because I knew he was in China, he lived in China, I know where he lived. We know what Amoy's current name is because it's a very big city, it's a very prominent city in China. So it's that detail is something that is very easy to find. But the pagoda is a lot more difficult, and particularly because Lam Tai Wu is not pinyin transliteration, so we're immediately sidetracked, like what it would be called in Mandarin Chinese, how it would be written down. So I usually start on like investigating and going down the rabbit hole, just searching for the name. Especially with Hans's labels, because he loved publishing. And in the publications, when he's describing journeys, he would describe the locations and where he got there a little bit longer than on his labels, detailing the journey, other cities they went through, what mode of transport he was using. So his publications and journal articles are a lot better than his labels finding locations. So I would usually start searching for Lam Tai Wu in the context of herbarium or Hans's name. Let's see if there is any publication pops up, or if there are any other labels that was mentioning another location that would be like nearby. So, and then I would find publications which is similar. So that is saying Nam Tai Wu Shan, and then another one, Nan Tai Wu Shan, mentioning around the same time that Hans was alive. And so Lam and Nan, in my experience, especially in Southern Chinese locations, it's something that kind of were used interchangeably. Nan would be the pinyin, a Mandarin Chinese version of it. And when I'm searching for something that may be spelled slightly differently, if there is a space, as you can see on the label, but no space in the text, I'm usually trying to compare if there is anything. So all of these publications talking about this particular pagoda is also mentioning in the text Amoy, which, considering that in China, pagodas are not a very rare sight, it's still not really helping us, especially that all of these publications have these bearing, and I couldn't find a single possible way to decipher the distances and directions of what was the starting point. And then I found a publication that actually has with the characters as well, which is super helpful because I can just put the characters in the search engine and start looking at Chinese publication in Chinese if they mention anything. If I don't see any results for the English one, maybe I can find something in Chinese. And then all my searches are taking me to this image, and a lot of description about a pagoda that existed since the 9th century in Amoy. Describing it, that was the pagoda that is closest on the sea, on the hill, and when travelers were approaching China from the sea, that was the first thing that would signal that you are closing in on a mainland, that like a land is starting on, so maybe you should pay attention to not get stranded. And it's also like, where are you in position? So it's kind of like a guidance tower. When I looked at Chinese publication and compared it to the historical English ones, the positioning of this pagoda in the Chinese text and in the English one was then the same, that it's in Amoy province, on the in Amoy city, on the southern part of the city, on a peninsula that has kind of like the highest point in the neighborhood where the pagoda stood to signal it for visitors who are coming from the sea. So all of them pointing basically at one direction. But if I was looking for a pagoda there, I couldn't find anything. And I found a couple of Chinese articles. So this is one of the map I found, environments, like neighborhood of Amoy, this is where the city is. And in this particular point is the one that looks very similar to one. So when we're working in Chinese locations, you have to take into account that depending on what map you are looking at, what country published it, when it was published, who wrote the label, who told the person where they are, is all going to be different, the spelling. So matching of spelling is the least reliable option for Chinese georeferencing because it's a rarity that it happens. So I found this map, I found a location that is roughly where all of the publication that I read points to with here. So then I went on Google Maps and I couldn't find a single thing. And I have come across a couple of publications mentioning the projects and like a council, or more like a group of people doing a project and trying to gain fundings for it. And then I came across an article that is mentioning kind of like a tourism website, mentioning that there used to be a pagoda here from the 9th century, and they used a lot worse version of this particular photograph that it was destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. So no wonder that I couldn't find anything, but compared to maps and descriptions, this is basically the point where it likely was. And that's where it's also mentioning that there are projects of trying to maybe restore the pagoda, maybe not the pagoda itself, but at least the temple system that was together with the pagoda at the time. So that is one particular example. And if anyone has any questions, we can stop and talk about it, or we just go to the next one. I think I'm just gonna go to the next one then.
I think potentially any questions? There's none in the chat, so yep, I think go to the next one.
Yes, like there are a few. I think some of them. I think one of the example was mentioning like 1720 feet. The label is 1800s, and that is roughly matching up that particular point. If I'm changing it to meters, so that was on the right as well. When I'm doing searches like this, I always take into account if the altitude that they're mentioning is roughly matching it. Depending on how old you go back to your labels, I'm always going for approximate and not exact matches as well. But yeah, I ended up concluding that because that was all of the publication pointing to Chinese and English, and otherwise the altitude matched, the surrounding matched, and all the description matched. It's just the pagoda is not there. So that is one of those cases when you would mark it as an uncertainty that the pagoda goes destroyed, but this is at a very likely position. And I would probably include it in my sources, like the article that was mentioning that the pagoda is destroyed. But yeah.
Okay, I think that seems to be it. So for now,
yeah. So I think these were a lot. Yes.
Sorry, just on that example there. When you're inputting that then into your absolutely amazing spreadsheet, I'll be having dreams about that spreadsheet. It's amazing. When you're putting that in, are you using the modern transliteration then of the Chinese or Hanses, or are you recording all the kind of in-between steps you have to go to get to the modern transliteration?
I'm the person who is going to include everything because you need the historical spelling, especially what's on your label, because that's how people who have the same location, maybe from the same collector, can find it by searching for it. Because if I did that and someone else has the same label because of a duplicate specimen and they're looking for the modern one, my result is not going to pop up in their search. So I include the original one because that's like what's on the label and make it searchable. I will include the modern version as well, the pinyin, and as well as the Chinese characters as well. So it doesn't matter what you're searching for, you are going to get to my results. I usually approach the same way when I'm adding in collector names, especially if their name was transliterated in various versions from their original language, because there will be variations. There is a reason why almost every single Russian collector's name is going to appear on labels, especially historical labels with the German transliteration and not the one that we would use in an English-speaking country. So I usually include the original Russian Cyrillic, I include the modern transliteration, I include the historic transliteration. If there is multiple historic transliteration, I would include all of them, kind of making the data more findable.
That all makes me so happy deep inside my soul. Thank you.
Yes, I like to as much data as is possible because I know how difficult it is, especially if you have absolutely no background knowledge in a particular language and you can't be having background knowledge on every language in the planet because that's impossible. And especially if you think about like as well like how English language changed just in the last 200 years. You can do the same, like languages change over the time, spellings change, either due to natural changes or due to political turmoil. Yeah, like Russian labels. Sorry?
No, I was just going to say I had fun with trying to transliterate an ancient Greek coin that was potentially archaicizing to an even older alphabet at one point. So I understand.
Yeah, I recently had like went through a podcast when like they're talking about like cultures that the ancient Greek thought they are ancient, and I was like, this is a level of historical layers that I haven't thought about.
Well, thanks
So
very much. Thank you.
no worries. But yeah, like I don't think I have in my examples, but Russian labels are particularly that. So if they were before 1917, before of the Bolshevik Revolution, you're gonna have significantly different spellings than the modern day spellings because they've removed letters from the alphabet to make it easier for the working class and less educated people. But that means that you have essentially letters in your labels that doesn't used anymore, is not used anymore. And even though the word and the places still exist today, their spelling is going to be different. I have a friend who grew up in Moscow, and when I have horrible, terrible Russian labels, I always send it to him like, what is this supposed to be? And the reaction is always like, where did you get this? No one spells it like this anymore. And I'm like, yes, the label is 100 years old. Thank you. So yeah, it's a lot of changes. Human history is working not in our favor usually. So this particular two labels, I thought they're a very good example of border changes. So it's similar to the one that I already mentioned in the morning. The left one is just saying Shinguki Shinkocho. You can see that the exact same collection information mentioned in the publication as Shinjuki Shinkocho. So there's already one spelling variation. And if you're searching for like where this person was collecting and where this particular specimen is from, it's going to be Taiwan. The name is as well, like the species name is Formosana. And again, it's 1902. Japanese occupation was on Taiwan, so every single name was in Japanese for place names. And if you were a collector there, you would write down the Japanese names. The same goes for the one on the right side. Both of them say Yaponike, and they are both from Russia. I mean, modern day Russia. They are both from the Sakhalin Peninsula. but they both say they are from Japan, Sagalian Island, and I think it was like the Japanese name of places that are currently under Russian names. And in these situations, I just dig and dig and dig until I find the map where that was published. So that one is the latest Japanese government survey from 1901. So it's very close to our label, and all of the place names are in Japanese. So if I try to find the location, I just trying to find it, at least like narrow it down an area to look through, so I don't have to go through the entire Taiwanese map to find the place. And then I just painstakingly look at the map and trying to find it. The good thing is there is one fantastic thing with modern technology. If you go to, for example, the David Ramsey map collection that Louise put it in chat, you can actually search for text in the map images, which is super helpful, that you don't have to just look through every inches of the maps on their own. And this one is also a Japanese map of the Sakhalin Peninsula. And yeah, I think it's, Karafuto is the Japanese name for the Sakhalin Islands. I think Sagalian might be the Chinese name for it. Yeah, if you're like georeferencing areas that went through several hands throughout history, then you are going to look at a giant mess. I think my team has a spreadsheet that they are populate as they like go through the collection and digitize it for a particular historical region in Europe where every place name has names in 4 different languages, and whichever name you are going to find on your label is up to who your collector was. So I think at the moment we are like populating it with, if this is what you see on your label, these and these are also variations in other languages for the same place. So yeah. Oh yeah, that's another fun. So this is geographical changes causing you issues. We can take this to kind of to climate change affecting also, but I think in this particular situation, it was industrial changes to a geographical feature was the one that's causing the problem. So this is a label from 1842 where it just says Inditione Karakum, and then someone very nicely wrote on the label Tungai Sir Daria border northeast of the Aral Sea. So you'd think it's something that's very easy to find. We have very good designation of where to look for. I managed to pull up a map of the Aral Sea around the time when our collector went there, managed to find the location. So this is the desert of Karakum. And I think this is the river here, which is the Sir Daria River. I couldn't find Turgai, which I'm assuming means maybe a smaller river or a place, but this is the Sir Daria, and we are in the northeast of the Aral Sea. So I would put the coordinates somewhere around here, designating the radius to cover the entire area, because I'm uncertain of like what exactly we are looking at. But if you're gonna put those coordinates that maybe I'm halfway like just with a ruler and a pencil reading off of my very old map and put it on Google Maps to find the location, if someone else just have the coordinates and no additional context, they're gonna look at like this. The RLC is almost non-existent nowadays compared to how it was not a long time ago. So it definitely doesn't look like how it looked like when your collector was there. And that area that used to be in his label as next to the RLC and the river, there is nothing there anymore. It's just desert. So that kind of refers to back what Hillary was mentioning, that there is a reason why the habitat information doesn't go into sites, because it can change rapidly. And if the collector was writing very detailed, like marsh or river or beach, like sandy beach with other plants, that is not going to be very helpful in the future, only from historical perspective, like, oh, at least we know what the habitat was back then. Oh yes, yeah. I have a huge collection of expeditions and gazetteers for collectors that we are populating with one of the curator. I'm probably not going to put all of them into the spreadsheet resource, or maybe I will. It depending on like what the copyright is for them. If they are freely available, then yeah. But yeah, so this is one of those situations when we actually have a label that is pointing to a habitat that doesn't exist anymore. And if you would actually go there, you would just stand in the middle of the desert. And for that particular reason, I think there is one really nice custom that I encountered in botanical collections, that if someone's routes and expeditions are very detailed, and maybe they are sort of a big name in the industry, there will be people in the future who would, just for the sake of like appreciating the person or doing research, they would follow their route and stop at the same places, maybe collecting some more, and then you would immediately have like a temporal coverage of if the area changed, if the habitat changed, if you can find the same species in the same location. And you can really nicely connect the dots, pointing the locations as well on the map, how they went on their expedition. Oh yeah, then I have this one. This is one of my favorites. If anyone from here attended my other talk about transcription, I think earlier, like maybe earlier this year, that was the same label. That's the same specimen I included. So I think that's not from an EGEM. I think it's from the French Natural History Museum. But I really like this label. So the label is just telling us that it's from Ile de Saint-Cyr, China, and it's the tomb of Saint Francis Xavier from 1907 from Joseph Esquirol. So we are looking at a saint, and if you search the saint's name, so usually when I first transcribe, and then it says 07, and I usually go by of checking the time where my collector was alive, and then I can figure out what the first two number of the year is. And if it's in, I live in the UK and working in an English-speaking environment, so I would translate the label into English to understand, or like help the others looking at the record. And depending on what the custom is, like what the guidelines are in your institute, I would put square brackets where like I'm indicating something like an extra information for the place, or if there is like another name, modern name for the same place. So Ile de Saint-Cyr is Shangchuan Island, and it's in the Chuanshan archipelago. So we could already narrow it down to one island, but why just stop there? Can we actually find the tomb of this saint? And then I went down the rabbit hole finding the saint who died in the 16th century. And you can argue from different point of view if it's a sad story or not a sad story. He was a missionary, like a missionary person, missionary, who wanted to go to China, mainland China, to kind of spread the word. And at the time, in the 16th century, you would be designated, if you're a foreigner, to wait in this Shangchuan Island until the Chinese governments decide if you get a visa or not, and if you can enter the country. So that's a small island just off the coast of mainland China. So he was waiting on this island to get his visa approved, and he died before he could ever receive a visa. And then he was buried on the shores of this particular island. So you'd think if we know that much information about him, it would be rather easy to find where his tomb is. But so basically a year after he died, his body was moved to Goa. So if you're searching on the internet and trying to find his like kind of tomb and resting place, it's all of the results are taking you to Goa instead of this Chinese island. But because we have a missionary person, like a missionary from 1907 who visited his tomb in China, then there must be like a reference or like a memorial raised for him that this is where he died, that was the original tomb where he was moved from, or at least it must have existed in 1907. And so I started researching this island as well, and the description I find anyone else mentioning the tomb or at least this island, possibly a religious person. Could you tell us a bit more about the way you use square brackets indicate interpretation? Indicate interpretation. So square brackets just indicate that like, so this particular one, I wouldn't add any more information because this was for this particular slide. But if I'm doing it in our collection management system, if it's like a name change that is the same place but different name, I would adding in an equal mark and would have the modern name. And if it's an interpretation or additional extra information, then within the square brackets, I would actually explain that it's that particular island is on this particular archipelago, or if the name changed in like, and the year, if I know when the name changed, to have additional context as well. So there would be a little bit more information than for the purposes of this slide. Oh yeah, so because he was a saint, and the other person who was visiting his tomb was also a person with religious affiliation, I would try to dig through if I have any more information. And organized religion really likes to keep track their people. So if you're looking, if the collection that you have was made by like a brother or a member of an like a religious organization or a priest, you would be surprised how much information you can dig out of records from that particular church. Assignments of priests to specific missionaries, to specific areas, locations, and villages that they're supposed to do their job, which year they were transferred there, which year they were moved to another location, what work they were doing there, things they built, building they built. It's amazing. It's quite useful for us to figure out where these collections are from. So I ended up finding some photographs in, I think it was the Harvard University's photography collection of another religious person visiting the tomb of Saint Francois Xavier, and Our Labor is from 1907. These black and white photographs of the actual like church that stands above the tomb is from the 1920s. So that was really helpful for me that at least in the 1920s it still existed. And from the photographs, there are several building features that you can recognize if you're looking at satellite maps. So there is some stairs, a monument here, we have the church here, and like an extra building here, and it's quite close to the shore. So Changshuan Island is not that big, so I eventually just ended up looking at satellite images of the island to find the actual tomb. So this is one of those situations when you can have a very detailed set of coordinates with a very small radius, because we essentially know quite positively where the specimen was collected at. Go ahead. So these are examples, and there is a couple that I thought we can just have a discussion how we would go about. Or because I already did them, I can just go through.
Sounds good to me. Unless anyone wants with their hand up, or they have further questions based on the example we just went through.
Yeah.
Keep going.
No, I think we went on like that, like, you know, the lunchtime. Like yeah.
Or if anyone has any questions maybe from earlier that we didn't get to for Christina, feel free to put your hand up or do that.
Yeah, or I can just go through these ones. So I have a lot of Chinese examples because I work with a lot of Chinese data, but I thought I include two not Chinese ones or very local ones. So this one is from our collection. Oh, information treasure hunt. Yes, I tend to think about myself when I'm like getting tired of just repeating the same steps, or like it gets really monotonous sometimes. So I tend to think of like a mix of like a treasure hunter Indiana Jones and maybe like a Sherlock Holmes, like the natural history version of Sherlock Holmes, because it does a lot of like, I think there is a known meme of like a person with a lot of error it on a board, like different information and just like having crazy eyes. And sometimes I feel like that. I have a lot of printout maps in like A2 and A1 size, where sometimes I'm just kneeling on the floor and with a Sharpie and highlighter and pencils and trying to find locations on maps. But yes, labor Sherlock Holmes. Oh, that's a really good expression. Oh. But yeah, so this particular one that I found was really funny. So the label is not very nice, you could say that, with the handwriting, but it actually says Hyde's Cottage, and it's from 1836, and a pencil writing. So I see it very often, especially like in HM collections, that sometimes we have various labels, and the collector is usually pencil written on by either the current curator, previous curators, or visitors who were familiar with the handwriting of the person. So they will confidently say like, yeah, that's the handwriting of that person. So this particular one is saying that it's from Thomas Taylor, who was an Irish botanist, bryologist, and mycologist. And we also know like he was Irish, he was collected a lot in Ireland. But I can tell you that if you are going for Hyde's Cottage, there is not just one in Ireland. Then I would go down the rabbit hole trying to narrow it down which Hyde cottages are very recent, that wouldn't have existed in 1836. So I'm looking for a Hyde's cottage that was existing around the time when Thomas Taylor was around. And also possibly, hopefully, in an area that I know that he also collected some other times. Because if you find a place, but it's really out of the way of where you know all the other labels are from, and it's very likely that it's not going to be your correct site. So I found a book that I only have bits of it on Google Maps, no, Google Books. And I tried. There is not a single library who hold this book. It's not available to purchase anywhere. And on Google Books, there is only a few pages that are available. So I have very limited information to work with, but we have this particular thing that is mentioning Hyde's Cottage that was built by Reverend Hyde, and around at Killarney. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher every single Irish name. And it also mentioned that it's by a waterfall by this particular settlement, which I'm not even going to try. I have a friend who lives in Ireland, and she's constantly testing if we can figure it out how certain Irish names are said, and we are always hideously wrong. And so at least I found a Hyde's cottage that was existing in the 1830s. So based on the information, we know that he was attacked in 1837, but we don't know if the cottage was built after or before was the time, but at least there is a record of it. And there is another publication as well that is mentioning, I think that was as well published in like 18 something, or maybe like very early, like 19 or something, which basically just said like 8 miles reach the lane which leads to Hyde's cottage and this particular place, which is almost spelled the same, and also mentioning a waterfall like the previous one. So we already have a little bit more information of this Hyde's cottage, and then I ended up finding an, I think it was an eBay listing for a drawing that is having that it's Hyde Cottage, and Upper Lake is basically very close to this place as well. So I would assume that this is the same Hyde's cottage that all of these publications are mentioning, because the surrounding area of the description and the listing was referring to the same place. And then I went on and dotted around where I know Thomas Taylor collected at. So the red dots are representing places that we have collection from him. And additional information, the green dot is marking the place that he retired to after he was actively working. And if we are comparing all of these information where this is the Upper Lake, and there is a place Hyde Cottage here. So from evidence, I would say that this is very likely the Hyde Cottage we are talking about. And again, it would include uncertainty. I would include in notes like the deductions, the resources as well that I found, to kind of making it repeatable if someone looks at my data and like disagreeing, or how do I come to this conclusion. Then I can. I sometimes can't, because sometimes like my mother tongue is Hungarian, and sometimes there are things that I just know, and I had to use an argument at least once before where I had to explain that like your like listing is wrong. And the only reason I can tell you that is because my mother tongue and I know it's wrong. I don't have an evidence to show, it's just I know the language, I'm familiar with the language. So when I can, I try to include, and when you do like investigative work, then hopefully you can back yourself up a little bit. And then I have this one. So then again, as I mentioned with like the Chinese ones, if like we are always assuming that the distance, so no 4 miles east of Baltimore, is going to be in air distance. As I mentioned in the Chinese example, this can go wrong if you don't know that if the distance was measured by a person who was traveling on a crinkly river, their 3 miles north is going to be 3 miles on this river and not 3 miles in the distance of air. And this is one of those situations that we are talking of Ireland again, West Cork, and 4 miles east of Baltimore, looking at like in the air distances, it takes you to the sea. And if the person was writing a label like this, that it's like 4 miles east of Baltimore, I wouldn't assume that they went through and then went to here and decided that that's the 4 miles they are thinking of. It's most likely they went on like a very crinkly walk that was total of 4 miles, so it's somewhere here. So there's a lot of assumption that you have to make based on the results you're getting and knowing how people back then. I think one of my argument is usually that sometimes there can be errors on the labels, the dates can be wrong. And one good tool is to just put the same collector, you put your labels in temporal order, put the dots on the map. And if one of the dots says that in this day they were here and 2 days later they were like, I don't know, 5,000 miles away, and it was the middle of the 19th century where we didn't really have flights, then it's highly unlikely that your coordinates are good. This is again like when you have to use kind of common sense deductions to exclude places. Oh yeah, this is one of the favorite from my team recently. So this label just says west of Sportsman, and the only thing we knew at the time that it was the collection date and that it was from the Herbarium of Salmon, who is Charles Edgar Salmon. So at least we know the collector. It was his herbarium, it was his handwriting, it was easy. But he collected everywhere, like a lot of places. And spending a couple of years here in the UK and also working with my colleagues as well, we kind of deduced that Sportsman is very likely referring to a pub, but it's not a very unique name considering pub names in the UK. So where is the Sportsman? And eventually we found another label that was designating that this is a pub from Graveney, Kent, which he favorited because we have lots of specimens from him, and that is how it looked like around 1924 when he was collecting, and the pub still exists today. And that sparked the discussion in our team that it's a surprisingly high amount of labels that designates collection sites as a pub in the UK. So I think Hillary was suggesting that we should have a publication where we're just listing every pub in the country where we have collection from at the NHM.
Oh, it's more elaborate than that. No, it's going to be far. Where's my little start video? Yeah. No, I wanted it to be a bit more fun than just actually publishing what we already have from pubs. We then go visit those pubs if they still exist, and we assess the biodiversity of the pub garden and rate them on their pub garden biodiversity.
Well,
And I think that'd be an excellent coffee table book.
well, like I can, Craven is less than an hour away from me, so I can just pop over the next time and have a look see at the Sportsman.
We just need you to georeference all those pubs for us first, because I'm not going to do it, and then I'll very happily have you join me, and we'll go visit them all.
You would be surprised how little work we
curatorial
have.
experts. Huh?
You would be surprised how little we have to work, because pubs that still exist today with long history, they have their own websites detailing their history, and every photograph there is from the pub,
So it'll be
including
easy. Let's do it.
details how to get there. Like, for example, this pub.
Easy peasy. Let's do it tomorrow.
Yeah, I found a website for this Sportsman bar that it have photographs of it, like basically every 20 years since the beginning that they have it, from various angles detailing the story of it. And it also like telling you, like, if you're approaching from that road, turn right here and turn left there, and there you're gonna see the pub. It's insane. It's amazing. I love it. We could do something like, have you seen those maps where they put on with dots like every church in Poland, and it just covers the entire country? So we could do something similar for pubs that we have collection from in the Natural History Museum. Yeah.
I think we should.
Yeah. These are the examples I have. I think there is a discussion of like who has the worst handwriting, like Label Moriarty, and Louis says Alfred Edwin Eaton, which is, yes, he is very much on my top tier Haribird right before McLachlan, who also has atrocious handwriting. Oh, Theodore Cockera. He has very bad handwriting, but he also loved publishing and typing his own names everywhere. So, with Cockera, at least you have like a very, very significant number of publications to just decipher every label we have from him, because he just loved publishing and putting his names on everything. It's really handy when collectors do that. So I have quite a lot of labels from, we have a very, very large collection from, who was like Plant Hunter? Kingdom Ward. Yes, we have Frank Kingdom Ward. We have significant amount of collection. And we also have every single book he ever published about his travels. So he is detailing the habitat, the entire environment, basically like a day-to-day guide, like which city they went to next, how did they travel, what happened to them. Sometimes even publishing entire maps with the book, like fold-out maps inside the books, which is super handy because when people were publishing their travels, they would be using the same spelling as they were using on your labels. And if they have like a map that they drew and published about their own travels, you would have like an instant gold mine of possible coordinates with the same spelling on your labels. So that is the very positive scenario if someone just loved publishing about themselves and their travels. Yeah, I have quite a lot of these maps printed out. But yeah, these are all the ones that I planned. Yeah, so I don't know if someone has any questions or if you wanna talk about something.
There were definitely some more questions from earlier. Here's one.
Oh, Louis is posting like Ethan's horrible labels.
Yeah. They're brilliant. Wow.
Yes. He was quite a character.
Constantine, Algeria. Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Christopher's just asking, is there time for a set of questions he has about collaboration and georeferencing corrections to databases? Do you have some time?
So amazing. Would there be a time for a set of questions I had about collaboration and georeferencing corrections to databases?
Go for it. I'd say.
Yeah, we can. Definitely. I think you can share our NHM email address where we can set up a time. The questions are coming. Sorry. Yeah. Are there any good ways to get volunteers and general public suggesting corrections to errors in the data? We don't have a system set up at the moment because our data portal is being redesigned at the moment. And one of the suggestions was including an easy way for people who come across our data and suggesting if there is an error, maybe like a comment section under a specimen record that you would use, or like an easy way to identify the curator in charge that there is an error as well. For the general public. For volunteers, when I was a volunteer or when I just email the curator that I noticed an error in their section, or depending on how you are with the curators, some of the curators are fine with me correcting it because they work with me for several years. It depends on whose collection you are working with, what experience you have. I think I have several curators who just gave me the green light if I see Russian or Chinese labels to just pencil write next to the label on the herbarium sheet, the translation, which I think eventually we should I'm definitely going to include, I definitely include always my name and the date because we have certain Russian labels where I can already see that someone penciled in the, the Latin letter transliteration of the name, but from what name they used, I think the pencil note on the label was written in the 1920s because that name hasn't been used since then for that particular city. And then I wrote mine, which is the current one, but you never know how often like names change very quickly, and some of them are like due to political reasons. I'm from Eastern Europe, so when we had the Austro-Hungarian Empire with the royal family, every single street and thing was named after members of the royal family. And then we had socialism after the Second World War, then everything was named to prominent people in like communist and socialist people who were famous, and like everything was like named after Lenin. And then when the Soviet Union like dissolution happened, then all of these place names got renamed to new names. so in a span of like 100 years, we have so many names for places that it just changes due to political reasons. Yeah, politics is really stirring up your ability to find things. Yeah.
I'm just so jumping in on the yeah. So as Christina said, we don't have a streamlined, good way getting information through the portal. We do have. Let me just open my email again. Where'd you go? So apparently we do have the portal. Apparently sends an export of British specimens to the NBN every month for their atlas, and they do feed back through the NBN atlas to us on occasion. To then what we do is we pass those corrections from the community who are finding issues with the data on NBN. That gets fed to me, and I hand it to the associated curators for them to vet that, and then they update it quite manually. But again, it's very manual. There has been talk in the past about two-way APIs and things, which would allow people outside of the institution to edit the data. Which, as a data manager, I'm saying no. There's going back to my talk. One of the things is a secure system where we know who's making the edits and it's audited. So that it always going to have to be whatever the solution is. It would need to go through that filter where the curator themselves are then responsible for that update. So whilst we could probably find a much more efficient way of getting that feedback to the curators, it'll ultimately be the curators or the data managers who would have to make those edits within the actual CMS, as opposed to like a Wikipedia editing kind of fun.
Great. I think there was a second part there to Christopher's question.
Related to how do you incorporate georeferencing aspect of databases produced by individual researchers who have extended corrected the data they worked with? What are partial this correction? When I work, like I'm trying to think of like how. So when it's published, so for example, like a gazetteer, or there is a couple of publications. So for example, we have like a very, very large collection from CARE, who was almost exclusively collecting in Thailand. And there is a publication where they georeferenced every single collection site he went to, or most of it, dates and the collection number of specimens that were collected from those particular dates. So depending on like how old those publications are, I always double check the coordinates if I agree with them, with surrounding area and names that I can recognize, especially if the publication is older than 10 years. I know it's a very strict, like I would even say like less than 10 years, but if you think of how much the internet changed in the last 10 years, and if I remember like how much like resources were available at the time, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, internet resources significantly increased. So one of my line manager was mentioning to me when I went to him that I don't feel like my georeferencing is good enough, or like if I disagree with it in like a year or 2 years time. He suggested that I look at georeferencing at a moment in time. And this is connected to like what we talked about, is like how history is constantly like happening in the background and is changing a lot. Your georeferencing, like maybe it's the best you can do at the time when you're living and doing it, and maybe someone can do a lot better in like a couple of years' time. You never know. That's why I'm always very careful to criticize when people make errors at the time. If the data set I'm working on like transcribed already, and I don't know who was the original transcriber, I don't know how old the spreadsheet, maybe it's 10 years old. But I always take it into account that this is the best they could do with the time and the resources that were available to them, and not because of malice or that they didn't wanted to do it properly. It's just guidelines change, georeferencing guidelines change, policies change, as the resources and sources change. Yeah, we make mistakes, and we're always going to make mistakes. I always double check previously published gazetteers for coordinates as well. I'm not sure if that's a good enough answer for that question. But I have a published data set as well that I published, I think, I don't know, like a couple of years ago, and probably half of it I wouldn't agree anymore.
Yeah. Like that, it sounds like there's so much information like that can be added over time, or like you were saying, new old books are suddenly scanned and they're available, or maps and things, and just
Yeah, also like you not always know if you have like a data set, like what did they use for publishing. I have a data set where the entire data set is georeferenced, not using anything else but information on the label. It doesn't matter if somewhere else there was a publication that, oh, this particular specimen, I know the label is empty, but I actually collected in this place. That would be a different georeferencing project, and maybe compare the two spreadsheets to each other, because for the previous one, I was not confident enough to make assumptions if those publications are correct and I should use them. So I just went with primary information on the label.
Yeah.
It could be pretty much.
There's one for Hilary from Megan King. Well, she's two questions, but the first one's for you, Hilary. They've been having discussions with their Department of Environmental Protection about potentially not including GPS coordinates on herbarium labels for rare endangered species. But they're thinking that they'd have a numbering system to connect the label to the internal database within the Department of Environmental Protection, and then that could be obtained by request by people who want coordinates. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting and good point, because one of the things, this is, when I was going back to talking about how we have to take down an entire specimen record in certain situations, if you took the data away from a certain specimen, like just the coordinates in a situation where that was appropriate, we have the photograph of the label usually published as well. So yeah, I mean, that is something to really think about, because previously so you haven't actually put the data out there in terms of the coordinates potentially, but if the photograph was there, it was no big deal. Like, somebody would have to actually look at it as a human being and figure out what it is. But with OCR and AI getting so much better at digging through things, it's really an interesting thing to think about, how sensitive that is. So that's potentially a way to do it. I mean, part of me kind of goes like, you do want the data on the specimen. There's something really good about just being able to pull a specimen out of a collection, look at it, and have that data. But at the same time, that's not an unreasonable way of potentially, as long as it's well documented and everybody agrees. And so that when somebody in 100 years from now can look at that label and they know how to actually take that key, that identifier, and attach it to, find the information that they're looking for. That's the biggest worry, is just when these sort of codes and keys get lost in history. Certainly in our museum, some of our labels are just a number. And if it's a certain shape and a certain color, then we know that that is, Wallace's label. And so therefore, with that knowledge, we know to go and go to the libraries and get his field notes out, and we'll be able to actually rationalize that single number identifier because of that specialist knowledge. But that's because it's Wallace. If you don't turn it out to be a Wallace, people might not know what color label you used.
Yeah, it's very
So yeah, I
distinctive.
think if you want to, that's probably the best way to do it. You just have to make sure it's like everybody knows that that's how to deal with it within the institution.
Okay. Thanks for that. There's a second one for Megan, but I might just go to Rachel, who has her hands up here. Go ahead, Rachel.
Hello. Sorry, my question may end up being a bit long and rambling, so I thought I'd just
It's okay.
myself instead. My question's for Hilary, mostly actually. Thinking about you putting the data into the collections management system. We haven't previously had a proper collections management system, but we are just at the very beginning of the process of implementing one, which, yay, I'm very excited about, because it's really frustrating not having one at this point. But the system we're getting is Axial Collections, which I'm assuming you guys are still on EMU, but they work fairly similarly. And you were saying about putting data in, like, for field collection events in different places to the object records. And I'm still trying to get my head around how all that works. So Axial Collections has a field collection authority for like recording particular, like, collecting events. And my understanding was that that is things collected in a particular place on a particular day. But is that not how it works? So you'd have a record for a particular site, and then the collection date goes in the object record, and you just link to the... I'm confused.
One of the fun things, one of the reasons I'm talking about our collection management system is, whilst we do use Axial EMU, we have modified it quite a bit. So I'm pretty sure Axial EMU off the shelf has, as you say, the collection event is its own box. So when I was talking about it, I was like, oh, sites is a box and the objects are a box. But most versions of EMU, there's a third box that is the collection event. And at some point in the past, we decided to actually split that collection event data between the objects and the sites records. It was, I think we could have probably solved it in a different way and kept, because I do think there is value for the collection event to be a thing. For a lot of users, you had to jump. So boring. Oh no, you've asked me boring questions about how we've modified our system the way we have.
Sorry.
But no, I just don't want to bore everyone in the room. But
it's not boring. I'm loving this.
Yay. Okay. So one of the issues is, like, for a lot of disciplines and collections, the way that it was arranged is when you were databasing your object, you had to go into the collection event module, that box, and provide a certain bit of information there, and then you get to the site. And for a lot of collections, that was one-to-one. It was like, why do I have to jump through 2 hoops to put my georeferencing data in? Whereas, for other disciplines like entomology, it's like it's not one-to-one object to site to collection event. The collection event was actually really helpful because you have like a malaise trap, and that's going to relate to 7,000 insects. So that collection event was actually really useful to be its own little box. You just have that one thing about malaise trap. This day, it was me. What was your question again? Now I've gotten lost in my own little story about it.
Just kind of, sorry, geeky technical questions. But I'm just trying to work out get my head around the best way to record this sort of information and where the best place to put it is, because we have the majority of our collection comes from one person who was out shooting animals for about 40 years from the late 1800s onwards. But he would sometimes revisit the same place in different years, or double back on himself during the same trip, and then end up visiting the same place multiple times. I think that's where on different days, collecting different animals. So then you end up with multiple collection events that are in the same place, and just trying to work out the best way to link all that together without duplicating too much data.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Is just thinking about what's one-to-one, what's one-to-many. What I will say is that you're in a really good place. It's really nice to start from scratch. It might be daunting, but again, it's one of these things is just sit down and really think about, is this one-to-one? Is this one-to-many? Are we like getting some efficiency here? Where is duplication going to show up? And again, like I said, with the numbering system for hiding the species, it's just document it, and we don't get things right the first time around. That's why we're continuously modifying systems and stuff. But if you just, the main thing that we always do is like, okay, we don't know if this is the right answer, but we just need to be consistent about it. Because if we're consistent about it and we document how we've done it, and then we discover we've pooped it up, it's a lot easier to go back and just go, okay, this is how we did it, and it's consistent. So now we can map how we want to redo it. So if you go, okay, we're going to go with the collection event, you called it something other than a module, you called it an asset?
Authority, yeah.
Authority.
Same thing.
Okay. I haven't actually seen axial collections in the flesh, but yeah, I assume it's taking probably a lot of the my guess is because it's the newest one that they've built. So I suspect they're kind of taking bits and pieces of all the properties that they've taken over and trying to build something that is the best of all those worlds. But yeah, I as from my entomology background, I found having the collection event module separately was really good. I do agree that the fact that you had to go through collection events to get to sites was probably not the best thing. But I don't think removing it and trying to split those attributes between two different concepts was necessarily the right answer when you have things like I said, malaise traps or sites that you go back to that georeference spot because you're doing a long-term monitoring. You kind of want that georeference thing, but you have different collection events. So every single year you're going and setting a malaise trap at the exact same georeference spot. In those cases, I think it's really good to have it as a separate box. But bearing in mind all the users who didn't find that useful, if you just have them associating with the object separately, as opposed to hopping through. So, had I actually been in data, this happened before I was in data management, but my suggestion probably would have been for those to be two separate attachment fields on the object record. So it was optional. So, depending on the discipline, you can modify the system. So like go, all right, do the tab swishings, whether or not these things are available depending on your discipline, but for it to be an option to go, all right, I want a collection event as a record that's attached to my object, and I want a site attached to my object, but not having to hop through the hoops. But yeah, you just have to sort of then sit down and think of all those various situations, kind of play them out in your head and see if it works. Because we have not implemented that. We still, as I said, our current situation is we got rid of that box and we split all of the attributes into the two leftover boxes. But I hope that's slightly helpful.
It is, yes. Sorry for the involved nerdy question, but yeah,
no, that's all right. It's just that I'm
trying to get my head around how all of this works. And I was saying to my colleague this morning, I've signed up for this training. I know nothing about georeferencing, so it should be really useful for cataloging. Turns out I've been doing georeferencing for ages. I just didn't really recognize that's what I was doing because I've spent hours, weeks of my life over the last couple of months poring over maps, trying to work out exactly where things were collected on particular days. But yeah, it's just good to tie everything together and work out how to actually implement it in the new system and everything. So thank you very much.
That's the fun bit.
My particular favorite one that I use is this one.
Oh, it's all blurry, but it looks big.
Oh, wait. Is there a way to turn off? I think my video is blur my background. Is it not?
But you have to put a face on it for it to
Nice. Yes, it's actually a printout, like a fold-out from a book. So imagine that you have a 100-year-old book that has a fold-out map that is attached to the book. So I had to navigate that copy machine to kind of photocopy every part of the map and then sellotape it together so I can go through it with pencil, pens, and highlighters. It's from a collection of Kingdom Ward, who is unhelpfully using the Weijia's transliteration system, but he was collecting in Tibet, so you never know if he recorded Chinese names or the Tibetan names. So good luck with that. So yeah, it's the amount of time I went through having giant maps and just painstakingly looking at them. It's insane, but I love it. It's been
So great, guys. Everybody is asking, or there's a lot of people hopping in to upvote this comment in the chat about whether either NatSCA or DiSSCo could set up an online kind of listserv maybe, or a Slack server or something for georeferencers for when people get stuck. That might be something we talk about after and see can we figure out a way to if you guys have something kind of already set up that you use for people to, I don't know, contact you if they get stuck on something or they have questions. Do you have something like that, or should we think about maybe a NatSCA hosted or something?
I could say, like, you can find me on social media. Not that much on Twitter anymore, but I'm on Blue Sky. Unhelpfully, not under my name, so it would be rather difficult to find. But I think because we put the georeferencing resource Google Sheet and the GitHub in the chat. If we set up something and my contact details, I can just create an extra tab and add in details. And if we set up something, something that would be, well, I'm not familiar with Slack. If it's something that's like you can upload pictures and asking for help, I can look around if it would be working. Usually we have like as a team, we have like a chat where people can just pop in a picture like help. So I think something would be very helpful for people that get stuck with labels. So if Slack can do that, then this is something that you can go with. And if you actually create something, then we can always like let people know. And I can make like a giant red blinking thing in the Google Sheet that now we have some like server or a group we can join. I would love to collaborate. Everyone has such an interesting labels as well, and yeah, browsing through as well, and everyone I ever contacted was always super helpful in terms of like finding out more information. So
yeah,
you know, collaboration is good. Go collaboration.
So I don't know if you possibly did already share your Google Doc or your GitHub thing in the chat, but we can maybe circulate that after if that's all right. If you share it with training, like Laura and me, and we can circulate it to the attendees.
Louis just shared the resource and the GitHub as well. And
okay, I'll just copy them and maybe pop them in an email after.
Yeah, I can send you the Figshare links to my presentations, and you can share those as well if you want. If people are looking at like georeferencing resource, I know it's not that many at the moment. I'm planning to have a lot more in it. It's just most of these tools I have saved in like a bookmark folder that is very large. So I'm just gonna probably pull out the one that could be one, because sometimes I'm just bookmarking thing that is like a published book from the 19th century that can be very helpful. So yeah, I will.
Yeah, it's that thing, like you don't know who, it won't be useful to everyone, but someone might be really thankful that they have that.
Yes, and like it's gonna focus on specific regions I work with. So I have a little bit of resource on like East Asia, but I also have a couple of like tropical Africa and South Africa resources. And recently, because we are working digitizing the British and Irish Herbarium, I recently started amassing British and Irish guides and helpful things. So I'm planning to increase a little bit more, and I made like several categories that you can filter by, and Google Sheets has that function that multiple people can work on it at the same time and filter it down that only they see the filtering, so they don't disturb other people browsing the same sheet. So you can browse if you're looking for a tool, a place name help, an online map collection, and like geographic regions as well, if you need to filter it down. So hopefully it will be a resource that people can use.
Definitely. I'm dying to see it. Thank you all so much to Christina, Hilary, Malcolm, and Louise. Sorry.
Louise.
Thank you so much for today. It's been a whirlwind, but really, really good. And the reaction's been really great from all the attendees. So thank you. You're getting loads of thanks in the chats. It has been recorded just for people I'm sure you know, if you've been online, you're aware it's being recorded, but we will circulate it and it'll be posted to the NatSCA website as well for people to watch back at a date to be determined in the future. In terms of training, upcoming other NatSCA stuff, next week we've got a lunchtime chat on Thursday.
I think Emily went.
Thursday about we've got two of our, hi, sorry, did I break up?
Yeah, your microphone went out just when you were telling us all the information.
Yeah.
I said it's being recorded, so we're going to circulate that and get that on the NatSCA website from today. Next week, we have a lunchtime chat on Thursday with our DCAN team from Dublin, here where I'm based, and they're going to talk about packing and moving and stillaging large and awkward things. So please do check that out. It should be in your emails. And just to flag with people, particularly people who might be doing some interesting georeferencing projects, that we are going to be issuing the call for papers for our NatSCA conference for next year in December. So our conference is in May, but as in next month, we'll be issuing the call for papers. So keep an eye out for that. We're particularly looking for papers that focus on ideas, sharing ideas, tools, and guidance, related to our work on natural history collections. So yeah, thanks everyone very much, and I hope to see you at another NatSCA event soon.